Welcome everyone to the Fleet Forum Wednesday webinar. And my apologies for being late. We have a new platform that we use for our webinars, and I thought I was already in the webinar. So I was talking to you for quite some time, until my colleague Rose said, "You're not in the webinar yet." So we chose a new platform, and you will see that we have a new platform. And the main reason that we decided to move to Zoom, in this case, for the webinars is that we now have a new feature. And that feature is that you can have, let's say, my voice be subtitled in many different languages. So this is based on the request we get from a lot of our members that say, it would be great if our Spanish-speaking colleagues or French-speaking colleagues can follow the webinars as well, and it's being translated. In this case, it's translated via subtitles. So you see that you received an invitation from Roos van Stijn to use a Zoom app, and the Zoom app is Wordly Translation. And Wordly is the app that you can choose, and if you open that, you will see that you will have the chance to have my voice subtitled in a different language, in a language that you choose, prefer, or you feel most comfortable with. And like I said, it would be great if you can let us know if you can hear my voice, if you can see me well before we start with the actual webinar. And in the chat, you see the chat, it would be great. Then just let me know if you can hear me, but also tell us your name, the organization you work for, what country you're based, so we have an idea on who is in the chat. Yeah, I see thumbs up, so I can be heard, and it would be great to see if people also, let's say, can hear me. Yeah, very good, very well. All right. I see, Paime, you raised your hand. Maybe you can use the chat, let's say, because I cannot get you, let's say, on stage, so to speak, in this webinar. And it would be great if you can use the chat so we can see, let's say, if you can all hear us. Yeah. And I see that Tony says chat seems to be disabled. Thank you, Tony. Rose is working on that to enable it, because indeed it's very quiet in the chat. So Rose will work on that, and our apologies for some technical hiccups at the start of our new feature, of our new platform. But now I see, yes, that people come in and I see that the chat works as well. So the chat works, that's great. You also see a Q&A feature at the bottom of the page that you can use to, let's say, to raise your questions during the webinar. Okay, so without further delay, I suggest that we start, because we're a bit over time, so I will share my screen and we will start with the webinar, which is around rental vehicles. And should we measure the performance of rental vehicles? Well, many of you will use rental vehicles. Some will use more rental vehicles, some will use less rental vehicles, but most organizations, so most of you here, will use rental vehicles. And there's many reasons to let's say, to use your vehicles. And also whether you use rentals for short-term, medium-term, or long-term. For example, you have a peak in your transport demand. So for short-term, you, let's say, deal with that peak by, let's say, renting vehicles for short terms. Maybe you have an issue because you have some vehicles that broke down or under repair. So you need to have a backup for your own transport capacity because you cannot deal with the transport demand at that moment. There might be a sudden onset emergency. And in that case, you might not have enough vehicles yourself. So on short term, and sometimes even on medium term, you will rent vehicles. Organizations deal with funding restrictions, do not have the capital to buy own vehicles. So they might choose even for medium or long term to rent vehicles. And the last, but there will be many more, and I will ask you about many other reasons as well, is that there's local regulations that limit you to import vehicles. So let's get a bit of an idea on what the situation is in your organization. So we're going to do a poll, and the poll is, I would like to know if you use vehicles. And I'm going to do the poll. Yeah. No, yeah. Do you use it? Yeah. Okay. So the poll is up there. You can vote. So how many rental vehicles do you use? Estimation. You might know the exact number. That would be great, but just an estimation. Yeah? More than 50%, between 25 and 50, between 10 and 25, or even less than 10%. So let's see let's say, how the split is within at least the participants in this webinar, how many vehicles are being used. And so it's great. I see some people already typing, let's say, in the chat as well, but you should be able to see the poll, and you can vote for the poll here as well. So I see that we're sort of getting there, and I hope that if we end the poll, that we can see the results on the screen. So what we see here is that 28, so close to 30%, use more than 50% of their vehicles are rental vehicles. That's also around the same number as less than 10%, and 25 between 25 and 50%. So let's say almost half, or even a little more than half of the organizations, half of your fleets, have 25% or more of their fleets are rental vehicles. Okay, so let's go into, let's say, the next one. So we do see there's quite some rental vehicles here. And we go to the next question to you. So what is the reason that you use rentals? So you might have like a funding to procure vehicles, or you do it because you are in a country where there is an emergency at this moment. So on short term, you need vehicles. Your transport demand is not very, let's say, stable. So for the peaks, you use rentals. You use it because you have to have a backup for damaged vehicles or lost vehicles, local restrictions. It's just more cost efficient, or there might be other reasons as well. So would be interesting to see. And indeed, like Rose said, if you think, oh, I have another reason, and you can please share it in the chat. So I see that 60% of you already answered the question. So what we see here is that I'm gonna end the poll here, that the majority of you says, well, we use rental vehicles for short-term or emergency programs. And the two next ones, I would say, is we don't have funding. So 30% of you said we have an issue with funding to procure vehicles. And we know that since a couple of years, governmental donors are not so keen anymore to, let's say, provide funding to procure vehicles. They are more than happy to provide funding for transport. but not for procuring vehicles. So if your organization does not have the capital itself to procure the vehicles, that is a limitation indeed. An unpredictable transport demand as well. So upfront, you do not know, or you know that there are peaks, and for the peaks, you use rental vehicles. Okay. And I see in the also interesting in the chat some people who say, well, for security reasons, you want to be low profile, you don't want to be visible. That's why you use, let's say, I would not say invisible, that would be great, but vehicles that are not visible as vehicles from your organization. Okay, the last one then to get your input is, what do you see as a trend for in rental vehicles? Do you see that, oh, the number of vehicles are increasing? We see the number of rental vehicles increasing over time. It remains the same, or the number of rental vehicles is decreasing. And it's also an option, no, we don't rent vehicles. But it doesn't seem that many of you would choose that we do not rent vehicles. Yeah, very good. I see the numbers going up. Yeah. So what we see here is that the majority of you see that the number of vehicles remains constant, about 1/3, but it's also 1/3 that see the number of rental vehicles is increasing. So let's say the conclusion here is that more and more rental vehicles are being used, so that the percentage of rental vehicles in fleets of organizations whether stable or is increasing. So if we think about that, then you see that there are many good reasons, let's say, to there's many good reasons to rent. There's also some reasons that are forced upon you. Like 1/3 of you said is we don't have the capital to buy our vehicles ourselves. So the good reasons are it solves organizational limitations, whether you don't have capital, for example, to buy new vehicles. It solves also some local regulations like import restrictions. You're not able to import vehicles. It might also be that you say, well, it's more cost efficient because I only use them in the peaks. So therefore, I don't have to own vehicles for the peaks. I can just, let's say, rent them for short term, which is more cost efficient. Maybe in some cases, it is more cost efficient, but rental is cheaper than owning vehicles. You can use it to reduce your fleet. So you only use your fleet for the transport demand of which you know that is really needed. And the last one is also something that more and more organizations look at is donors really like rental because it's clear. They don't provide funding for procuring vehicles, but they do, let's say, so it's much easier for them and very clear also from a financial perspective that the organization said, I rent vehicles, this is what it costs, and donors can provide funding for the rental vehicles. Let's have a quick look into the last one. Donors love it. So donors do like and even encourage, and we are not always sure that that's the best recommendation, because in some cases we think that you should have, let's say, a basic of own vehicles in your fleet, and you use rentals whether indeed for emergencies, short-term solutions, or for dealing with peaks in transport demand. But donors do like it because it's clear for them from a financial perspective. But here you see a snapshot from ECHO and the minimum environmental requirements of ECHO. So even though donors say, yes, we like that you use rental vehicles, they have exactly the same requirements for vehicles rented or vehicles owned. So for donors, it does not make any difference whether you use owned or rental vehicles. It's good to take that into account. So yes, there are many good reasons or many forced upon reasons to use rental vehicles, but it's also good to realize that there are serious risks involved in rental vehicles because you have less control over vehicles. And I don't need to explain, I think, to you what the main risks are. You see them here. You have vehicle risks. Vehicles rented might not be the safest vehicles. They might be not so well maintained. They don't have the safety features that you request. Drivers might be a risk because the drivers might not be trained well, or the drivers might not be fit to drive. There's financial risks. It needs more budget from your transport budget than owned vehicles, or the use of rentals is not always very, let's say, insightful. There might be legal risks. Vehicles might not be insured very well, or liability issues might play a role in rentals. And also reputational. You don't know always what your rental provider might do with the vehicle on which there is a logo from your organization. So there's a lot of risks involved in renting vehicles. So, and I'm trying to, yeah, I'm sorry, because I don't see my own screen anymore, so I'm trying to solve that. Yeah. The slide need. Okay, so I'm going to look at, let's say, another slide as well. So the number of rental vehicles and the risks involved, let's say, require tracking of performance, where we do know that many organizations do not really look at rental vehicles because they say, well, it's outsourced, so we don't use, let's say, it's not our responsibility anymore to rent vehicles. We see it, for example, in the benchmark, where we see that many organizations do not look at whether drivers of rental vehicles are fit to drive, whether the companies do medical checks, whether the vehicles are being maintained well. We also see that, let's say, organizations in looking at emissions of vehicles, 1/3 of organizations do not take rental vehicles into account as their own emissions. But in fact, what we see here is that we really need to look at rental providers and the risk that they take to really track performance. Extremely important. And some of the questions that you can raise here are, does the provider deliver the service that you need? Does the company provide the service according to your own standards? Is it cost efficient to rent, or should you maybe own your vehicles? What are the risks involved, or how to mitigate? And do you have insight in performance? So I would say, if you look at rental and all the risks involved, you need to track. Also, looking at risks, important to realize that there is a relation between the number of services that you take from a supplier and the risk that you have. If you only rent a vehicle, just a vehicle, then the risk is pretty low because it's under your own control. You have your own driver, you know what's happening, you can track it, etc., etc. If you increase the number of services, your risk level goes up because you have less control over what's happening with the vehicle. And if you have everything outsourced, so vehicle, the driver, fuel, maintenance, then your risk is the highest. And because you have less visibility if you don't, let's say, deal with that in the right way. So So I would say, if there is a difference between owned and rental vehicles, that is that rental vehicles need more management attention. So you can never, ever say that rental vehicles is outsourced, so it's not your responsibility anymore. Even better, I would say, it needs even more of the attention of the fleet managers globally in countries, because you have to ensure that they meet the same standards that you have insight in performance of rental vehicles. Okay, so how to work with rental companies? What do you need to do? Three ones, and there might be many more how to work, but three main ones is you have to have very clear standards that you set, that you request from, let's say, rental companies. You have to review the fleet management plan of your suppliers, and you have to get insight in the performance of these suppliers. Let's have a quick look, and it's definitely not all the topics are here, but just some examples of what you can think about how to set the standards. So if you look at vehicles, you look at, for example, the type of vehicles. So fit for purpose vehicles, city vehicles in the city, maybe off-road vehicles only when you really need them. So they have to select the best vehicle which is fit for purpose, not oversized, not undersized, but also with the right emission standards, the highest possible emission standard that you can get. You have to have specific requirements on safety features that you request from the rental company in the vehicle. A maintenance and repair plan. You have to ensure that the vehicles are being properly maintained and properly repaired if needed. The registration. So is the vehicle registered? Does the rental company have allowance to drive in the region or in the whole country where you need a specific transport need? Is the vehicle insured? Does the company check mental or physical and medical fitness of the driver? Are the drivers being trained? Do the drivers speak the language that you request to be able to communicate with passengers? What's your stand on night driving? I hope you all have said, no, we don't do night driving. That needs to be clear for the rental company as well. And how does the rental company deal with waste? Like I said, there will be many more ideas, but these are at least the start of a list of requirements that you can set as a standard when you negotiate or discuss or work with a rental company. But also look at the company itself. So you have your own policies and procedures within your own organization. For the rental companies, they should have the same, like human rights policies, anti-discrimination, anti-fraud, and many more. So look at what is important for you. What's the values that you have as an organization? And you have to have a standard for the company you work with as well. So you need to understand whether the company has an environmental plan. More and more, it's important in our sector. We really should and want to reduce emissions of road transport. That means if you work with a rental company, they should contribute to your objective to reduce emissions. How do they deal with health and safety? Do they have a health and safety plan in order to protect themselves, but also the passengers? Most of the time, staff of your organization is being protected as well. And how do they manage quality? And again, also here, it's not an extensive list. It's just some ideas to give you an idea on what should you look at as setting standards to deal with a rental company. Okay. Then looking at the fleet management. Before you work with a company, you need to ensure that they have a proper fleet management plan. Again, here are some examples what should be in the plan. How do they deal with maintenance? How do they ensure that they always do preventive maintenance of their vehicle? How do they deal with their waste? How do they do journey planning? How do they test driver fitness, whether it's mental fitness, medical fitness, whether the drivers are being trained if they have backup plans, if for some reason the vehicle breaks down or is in maintenance, that they always are able to provide you with the right services. Okay. And last, let me say, set standards, review fleet management plan of your of the company rental providers, and last is get insight in the performance. And also here there might be more again, but at least we need to know the details of the vehicles that are being used. You need to ensure that you get insight in whether maintenance is being executed, what's the analysis of the driver behavior, their analysis of road safety, the fitness to drive of vehicles. And last but not least, and again, there will be many more, it's also be good to have a passenger satisfaction. So your own staff, your own people who make use of the rental vehicles, how satisfied they are with the services, especially if you have, let's say, a rental company which provides the vehicle and the driver. It's important that you do passenger satisfaction, which is important for you to monitor the quality of the rental company. So you might say, oh yeah, okay, that's a very long list of standards, of how to monitor, let's say how to get insight. Yes, I fully agree. It's not easy to deal with that. And I understand if you hire a taxi for one trip, it's of course impossible to do all of that. But what is also important is you want to do as much as possible to ensure that your standards are being met, to ensure that you have the right insight, let's say, in the company. That means that you have to try to build relationships for rental companies for a long time. One-time use of a rental company or one vehicle, you cannot set all the standards, all the requirements, and ask for insight in their performance. If you have a multi-year relationship with a rental company and you work with them on a regular basis, there's more and more that you can do. There's more and more that you can discuss with them on, so how will they able to meet the standards if they don't meet them yet? How can they provide you with insight in their performance that you have, let's say, that enables you to discuss with them how to improve it. So this is all about how do you improve the relationship with you and the rental company on mid and long term. Because the longer your relationship is, the better you're able to work with them, and then they can provide the services that you request. And therefore also the risk levels that will go down over time. Yeah. Okay, I will stop here. It is the end of the webinar time, but as we started a little later, I hope that you will still have time. As most of you know, we are always strict on time, but as we had some technical hiccups, I hope that you allow us for another couple of minutes to stay, let's say, in the webinar, and let's see if there's any questions. So Solomon, you said, does it really required for renting of vehicles, especially when traveling with partners for a field mission? I'm trying to understand, Solomon, exactly what you mean. Does it really required for renting of vehicles, especially when traveling with partners for a field mission? If you mean that, if all that I described as what you should do on setting standards, looking at performance, if that's all needed, I would say yes. And especially, I would say, if you travel with partners for a field mission, because that means that you have not only the responsibility for your own people, your own staff, but also the let's say, the responsibility for your partners. So then it's even more important, because you have an additional responsibility for the safety, for example, of partners that go with you on a field mission. Alicia said, do you have a sample renting, leasing contract that you can share to see how these responsibilities are captured? We can share with you. quite some organizations who use pretty good templates or standards for contracts with renting or leasing companies. So we can share that with you, and we do that, let's say, we will share that after the webinar with you. Yeah, good question, Alice. Okay, I see that there's no more questions in the Q&A, but looking at Marie asks in the chat, is it also necessary to find out if they do background checks on their staff? I would say yes, because the moment you raise the question, that's the moment that you think that it's needed to do that background check, because probably you have experience with drivers where there was not a background check being done and something in the end went wrong, or you found something out. So again, the list, the number of topics that I, let's say, listed in my slides are definitely not, let's say, comprehensive. So I would say if you feel like a background check is important, I would definitely always do it and check and monitor if they actually do so. Then, Jean, what is the frequency at which supplier evaluation should be conducted? For example, every quarter. I would say in the beginning, when you start, if you intend to build, let's say, a longer term relationship with a rental company, then in the beginning, I would do it very frequent. Actually, every month in the beginning for the first year. You have to get used to each other. It's good to have regular contact with them. And of course, again, it's based on if you have if you rent a vehicle for 1 day a month, that might be different. But if you use more rental vehicles with a company, I would say in the beginning, first year, every month, to sit together, to get used to each other. And then in the second year, once every quarter. Based on that, if you say, well, that really works well, we feel comfortable, we get the reports from them, then you might even go to once every half year. But in the beginning, I would ensure that you have a very regular contact, because also you have to build that relationship, you have to build trust, and you have to sort of build a relationship where they ensure you that they do the right things, they can provide the reports to you in what they do. So more in the beginning than later. Okay. What about the last maybe question then? What about leasing compared to renting? I would say there's a big difference between leasing and renting. So renting is you pay someone to use a car, and in many cases also a car and a driver. That other company where you rent from is still responsible for maintenance, from repair, for checks, etc., etc. If you lease, then actually you have a vehicle full-time available, and you pay a company a fixed amount per month to use that vehicle, most of the time for a period of 5 years. You are completely, well, you control that vehicle completely, because you need your own driver, you need to take care of your own maintenance, fuel, driver behavior checks, tracking, etc., etc. So in case of leasing, at least in most cases where you can use leasing, it's in the daily operations not different from owning the vehicle. There's a financial difference. You don't procure it, but you pay a leasing company. But in the daily operations, it's not different from owning a vehicle. Okay. I stop the webinar here. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your patience as well. In the beginning, especially, I hope we were able to cover most of the questions. And we hope to see you again next week, because next week the webinar will be about making the business case for electric vehicles. And that is sharing some of the outcomes and the learnings from a project that we do on taking learnings from the application of electric vehicles in Middle East and Africa. Thank you very much for being with us today. Hope to see you next week, and have a great rest of today. Bye-bye.